La cour des Invalides est trop étroite.
The Invalides is indeed too
4
small
mois,
a place.
jour pour jour,
4 months to the day
après.
after.
Car nous sommes 68 millions de Français
There are
endeuillés
68
par les
million
attaques
French people
terroristes
who
du
are
7 octobre dernier.
grieving after the
68
attacks
millions,
of last October
moins 40 de vies
7th.
fauchées. 68 millions,
68 million French
dont
people
6 vies
grieving
blessées.
for the 42
68
citizens who
millions,
lost their lives, 68
dont
million
4
grieving
vies à jamais
for
meurtries par leur
the
captivité.
4 French hostages that have been freed,
68 millions,
68
dont
million
3 vies sont encore
grieving for the
prisonnières,
3 hostages that
pour
are
la
still
libération desquels nous
held
luttons
prisoner,
chaque jour.
and we are working for
Leurs
their
chaises
liberation
vides
every day.
sont là.
They are represented here by the 3 empty
Orient,
chairs.
Aurat,
Orient, Orat,
Ofer.
Ofer.
Les visages des suppliciés du 7
The
octobre
faces of those tortured on the 7th of October
se
are a
reflètent
mirror
un peu de
to
nous
us.
dans chacun d'eux.
We see ourselves in
De ce
their
que nous étions,
faces,
de ce que nous serons à
what we
leur âge,
were, what we
ce
had
qu'ils ne
been
seront
at their
jamais.
age, and what they will never be able to live now.
Ils n'avaient pas 20 ans.
Many of them were not even 20 years old.
Noya, comme Nathan, ne les seront
Noya,
jamais.
Nathan will never be 20 years
Leurs
old.
traits qui s'affirment,
We see their
qui se
faces,
bousculent, Dieu,
the questions that they had as young people about God, life, the world,
les hésitations et l'irrévérence,
their doubts,
leurs regards comme des
their
interrogations, leurs sourires en
irreverence,
forme de
their
promesses,
questions,
mémoire
their
de nos propres adolescents.
smiles full of promises, their burgeoning
Ils n'avaient pas 30
adolescence.
ans.
Some were under 30.
Avidan, Valentin
Avidan, Valentin,
ou Naomi ne les auront jamais.
Naomi will never be 30 years old.
Des rêves plein la tête, des études
They were
de
full
droit
of
ou
dreams.
d'informatique,
They were studying law,
métier,
computer sciences. They
un
were
grand
dreaming
amour,
of a career, of great love.
des fiançailles,
They
la
were
foi ou
planning
l'athéisme,
to become
une guitare,
engaged.
une planche de surf sur les vagues de la
They
Méditerranée,
loved their guitar.
des
They
idéaux
loved
dans la haute
surfing
du monde,
on the Mediterranean Sea. They had ideals and visions of
ils
a
étaient
better
dans la
world.
force de l'âge. Céline,
They were full of life and vigor. Céline,
Elias,
Marc,
ne
Elias
vieilliront pas.
will never grow old.
Leur chemin frayé a pris d'efforts, peuplé de projets,
They
d'amis,
worked hard
d'enfants
to
parfois.
build their projects. They had
Et ce
friends.
sourire
Some of
qui
them
n'aura
had
pas eu le temps de
children.
marquer leur visage. Ils avaient les tempes grises.
Some of them were older,
Carmela, Jean-Paul,
with the gray hair.
Yaffa,
Camilla, Jean-Paul,
elles ne
Yaffa.
grandiront plus.
No more gray
Leur
hairs
voix
will
résonne
come.
encore en hébreu comme en français.
We still hear their
Leur voix
voices
qui
in
se cassait
Hebrew
par
and in
moments de
French.
tendresse ou de
Their
pudeur,
voices sometimes
transmettant
broken
des
with
récits puisés au fond
with
des âges
tenderness.
que leur avaient livrés leurs propres grands-parents.
They were transmitting the wisdom that they had learned from their own grandparents. We see their faces now,
Interrompus.
lives interrupted,
Des histoires de famille où s'entrebâillait parfois un
family
gouffre indicible
stories
et où,
are
comme l'odeur de
suddenly
l'espérance,
broken
le parfum
apart,
des collines de Jérusalem se mêlait
and
à
around
celui
the
des
hills of
sous-bois
Jerusalem,
d'Île-de-France ou des ruelles du
we
Vieux-Port.
hear the cries of people mixed with cries from
Le 7
people
octobre dernier,
in France as well. Last
l'aube.
7th of October, at the dawn
l'indicible
of
a
the
ressurgi
day,
des profondeurs de
the
l'histoire.
unspeakable happened, reaching out from
Il
the
était
black
6
depths
heures
of history. It was
au
6
festival
in the
Nova,
morning
à
at the
quelques
Nova
kilomètres
Festival,
de la bande de Gaza,
just a few kilometers from Gaza Strip,
où sous les banderoles et le ciel qui pâlissait,
under the
s'achevaient
pale
24 heures de fête et de
sky.
retrouvailles.
24 hours of festivities had just concluded. The young people were dancing there, and they did not know that the jaws of death were about to close upon
Des
them.
voitures, des motos hérissées d'armes
Cars,
allaient fondre sur eux.
motorcycles, loaded with weapons,
Il était 6 heures.
fell upon them. It was 6
Et le
o'clock in the
Hamas
morning,
lança,
and
par
Hamas
surprise,
launched a
l'attaque
surprise
massive
attack,
et
a
odieuse,
massive and odious
le
attack,
plus grand massacre
the
antisémite
biggest
de notre siècle.
anti-Semitic massacre of our century.
Et dans les notes de musique d'un lieu de fête
And
ont éclaté les tambours de l'enfer. Et les
mixed in
téléphones
with
de nos
the
enfants qui
music of
jusque-là
the festival, we
filmaient
heard the
les joies de
drums
leur
of
vie
hell. Young people were filming the joyful moments of their life, and these films turned into moments of horror. The sky was filled with rockets. The infernal brigades fell upon the festival, spread across the plains and the villages, broke open doors, broke into homes, into bedrooms, looked under beds. Fires were set. There were cries of killing. There were screams. There were people weeping, and then there was silence. Silence like a shroud. Silence. Silence in the face of the unspeakable. Sideration. Facing barbarism. Tears. Facing this savage attack. Barbarism. Burning, breaking, abusing, killing, tearing families apart, killing a young girl because she was slowing things down, grabbed a child in pajamas right out of the arms of her fathers. After the joy and the freedom of a festival came this horror, and we think about events in the Bataclan, in Paris, in Nice, in Strasbourg, the barbarism of these attacks that takes the life of young people as they have barely begun to live. We are ready to hear of Palestinian suffering, and yet this barbary seems to mask that. This is a barbary that feeds on anti-Semitism and that spreads anti-Semitism. It seeks to annihilate and destroy. And nonetheless, there were certain symbols of hope and light in this dark night. Young people who sent a last message to their parents, messages of love and thanks. A man who threw himself over a grenade to save the life of his two children, costing him his own life. And the sacrifice of another father who wasn't on the site of the attack, but when he heard from his daughter by telephone, he immediately jumped in his car to go find her and found death instead. Barbarism faced with light, because those who kill out of hatred will always find those who are ready to die for love. And always they will see that those who were touched by the 7th of October in their very flesh, from Montpellier to Tel Aviv, from Bordeaux to the Negev desert, the French citizens who died in the 7th of October were not all born in France, and they did not die under French skies, but they were French. French because they carried a love for France in their hearts, because they held ideals and values that are universal. From France because they loved our country with an ardent love. They learned our language. They loved our culture and lived with it constantly. And today at the Invalides, in this courtyard, we welcome family members, some of whom had never been here before, and their faces are with us. Let us remember their lives. They have left their mark on our lives for all time. Their destinies were not the only destinies that were broken by the tornado of suffering that is war in the Middle East. All lives are worth life. Victims of a terrorism against which we fight in all forms and which has stricken us at our heart. France welcomes our children home, and we do not forget any of our
refusant les
children.
séparations comme les
We
divisions,
refuse separation and
refusant
division.
l'esprit de mort, de
We
chaos et de
refuse
clivage
the spirit of
que nourrissent
death, of
précisément
chaos
les
and
terroristes.
division, which is exactly what the terrorists hope to
Jamais en
spread.
nous,
Never
nous ne laisserons prospérer
will
l'esprit
we
de
enable
revanche.
the spirit of revenge to be nurtured
Et dans ces
within our
moments de
hearts.
deuil,
And in these
dans les
moments of
épreuves du
grief,
temps, rien
these difficult
jamais
times,
ne
nothing
doit nous diviser.
will ever divide us.
La France restera unie
France will remain
pour elle-même et
united
pour les autres.
for ourselves
Unie
and
pour
for
se tenir
others,
au-delà des
united
destins et des différences au sein de notre
to look
nation.
beyond the
Unis dans
differences
ces
in our
moments de
own
souffrance
nation,
pour les Israéliens et les
united
Palestiniens afin d'œuvrer
in
sans
sharing the
relâche
suffering of
pour répondre
Israelis and
aux
Palestinians,
aspirations à la paix et à la sécurité de tous.
and
au
to stand by
Proche-Orient.
all those who seek peace and security in the Middle East.
Betaraim,
Betaraim,
dit-on en Israël,
we say in
pour
Israel,
désigner les cimetières,
to speak of a cemetery,
la maison de la vie.
the house of life.
Car pour ceux qui restent,
For those who remain,
leur vie sera faite
their lives
de ces absences.
will be made of
Une
absence,
vie différente,
a different
un
life,
monde différent,
a different world,
à l'aune du souvenir.
full of remembrance.
Et nous avons dès lors à
And we
habiter ce
now
deuil,
must live with
non
this
pas comme une
grief,
victoire de la mort,
not as a victory
mais
over
comme une
death,
invitation
but as an
à leur
invitation
trouver une place dans nos vies.
to find room for
Et ils sont là
those who have lost their
chacune et
lives
chacun,
in our life today.
pour nous rappeler que nos vies,
Each
leur
of
vie
these
méritent sans relâche
victims
de nous battre
remind
contre
us
les
that
idées de
their
haine,
lives, our
de ne
lives,
rien céder
are worth
à un
constantly fighting
antisémitisme
against
rampant,
hatred, against the
désinhibé,
growing
ici comme
anti-Semitism
là-bas.
which has
Car rien ne le
been
justifie,
growing
rien.
here
Car
and
rien
in
ne
the Middle
saurait
East, because
justifier ni
nothing
excuser
can
ce
justify
terrorisme.
or excuse
Rien.
terrorism. Nothing.
Alors nous nous tenons là,
So we stand here today,
4 mois après,
4 months after,
devant ces visages et ces chaises,
with these faces and these empty chairs,
bouleversés de tristesse,
filled with
aux côtés des
sadness,
familles de ceux qui ne sont plus,
standing with the families who have lost precious
chargés
members,
d'affection,
full
aux côtés de ceux
of
qui soignent leurs
affection
blessures,
for those who are tending to their
et ne cédant
wounds
rien pour
and
ramener
refusing to
ceux qui
yield
sont encore là-bas.
until we can bring the hostages home.
Sentiments mêlés que nous vivons ensemble.
We have very mixed feelings at this moment as we stand here
Regardant ces
together,
visages,
because as we look at these
nous
faces,
savons
we know
que nous ne sommes pas juste
that we are
68
not
millions
only
en
68
ce jour.
million people today,
Nous sommes beaucoup plus.
but many, many more.
Un peuple
A people
épris de liberté,
in love
de
with
fraternité,
liberty,
de dignité.
fraternity, dignity,
Un peuple
a people
qui ne les oubliera jamais.
who will not forget these victims, ever.
Vive la République.
Vive la
Vive la
République,
France.
vive la France.